everybody! Today we're going to be learning about section 3.9, which is about demographic transitions. And your learning objective for today is that you can define the demographic transition. The essential knowledge that you're going to gain is the different levels of these transitional phases, what contributes to them, and the characteristics of some of the countries that are in the different stages of the demographic transition. Now we're going to start out with 4 important vocabulary words to be aware of as we're talking about these different stages. So the first vocab word is going to be industrialization. And this is going to be the process of economic and social transition from an agrarian economy, which is going to be farming based, to an industrial one, which is more manufacturing based. So the first kind of grouping of this is going to be what's called the pre-industrialized or less developed. They're synonymous. They both mean the same thing. And so a country that is in the pre-industrialized / less developed is going to be a country that has not yet made the agrarian to industrial transition. So you're going to have majority of the population is going to be using farming to have a living from growing crops or having milk, or it's going to be like every family is going to mostly be involved in that. And typically these are going to be very poor countries. They're going to have a low GDP. We are also going to see high death rates and high infant mortality rates. And then because of this, we are going to see high total fertility rates because it's going to be replacing the children who already died. And also, if you have an agrarian society, you need more kids to help each family with the agricultural labor. And so we're going to also see a higher TFR because of that. Now, the next that we have is industrializing or developing. And these are going to be countries that are partway through this transition. So we might have like half of the society is still going to be making their living from farming. And then the other part is maybe going to be emerging into this manufacturing-based economy. But we're sort of partway through the switch here. And we're going to start seeing decreasing death rates and decreasing infant mortality rates. In addition to overall, the country is going to have a rising GDP, which is the gross domestic product. And then our last term here is going to be industrialized / developed. And these are going to be countries that have completed this transition. Now, if you think of a place like the United States, this doesn't mean that farming completely doesn't exist. It's just going to be potentially not that many people doing it, and it's not going to be the main form of their economy. So the United States, we do still have farmers here. However, most of our country's economic growth is going to be coming from manufacturing-based job markets. And in these countries, we're going to see very low death rates and low infant mortality rates. We're going to see very high GDP, and we're also going to see a low fertility rate in these developed countries. So if we look at this map here, we're going to see the ones in blue are going to be developed countries, the ones that have fully made that transition to a manufacturing-based economy. Now, if you notice, majority of the world actually is going to be developing countries that are in this in-between phase. So a large portion of their population is going to be having their livelihood be agrarian-based, but you do still have parts that are moving into this more manufacturing-based economy. And then in red, we have these least developed countries, the ones that are very much more agrarian societies. So we're going to have 4 stages that we talk about here. Stage 1 is going to be what's called pre-industrial. And these are going to be stages where we see a high infant mortality rate and high death rate. And this is due to lack of access to clean water, stable food supply, and healthcare. We also see a high total fertility rate due to the lack of access for education for women and a lack of access for contraceptives or family planning. We additionally see a high total fertility rate because of this need for child agricultural labor to help their parents out with their farm. Now, we actually see little to no population growth due to the fact that we have a high crude birth rate and a high crude death rate. So they're going to balance each other out, and we aren't really going to see much overall growth. It's going to be pretty stagnant. Now, you should be aware there is virtually no country left in our current modern world that is in phase one. Obviously, historically, we have seen countries in this pre-industrial, but basically all of the countries in the world now have moved out of stage one, and they're at least starting to be developing or in this no longer in stage one. So just be aware, stage one doesn't really exist, or we don't see countries in this right now. Now we have stage two. So stage two on the map is going to be those red countries that we just saw, and they're going to be industrializing / developing nations. Now they're starting to have some more modern things coming in that are bringing in access to clean water, healthcare, and more stable food supply. So we're starting to see a decrease in the death rates and the infant mortality. However, we do still see a high level of the total fertility rate, and this is going to be due to the fact that we still tend to have a lack of education for women and contraceptives and family planning. We do still have a large number of people having this agrarian way of living, and so they do still need that child labor. And we also tend to see a generational lag. So although we're starting to get some of the modernization of healthcare and water and potentially some of these available contraceptives, but we do see it takes a long time for education and societal changes to spread throughout the country. So you might have little pockets where maybe women are starting to have contraceptives and family planning available to them, but you might still have a large number of the rest of the country that's a little wary of it or still hasn't learned, because it takes a while for this to spread. So although we start to see some improvements in the death rates, it takes a little while for this fertility rate to start matching what we would tend to see in areas that have these decreasing death rates. So what we see in these countries is rapid growth. And this is going to be due to the fact that we have a high birth rate still, but we have a declining death rate. Now, some of the economic or societal indicators that we would typically see of countries in this stage two is they're still going to have a low per capita GDP. They're going to have a shorter life expectancy. We will have high infant mortality. Be aware that it's not as high as historically what we would have seen in stage two, but it is still pretty high compared to some other areas in the world. And we do still have a high total fertility rate. And we do still see low literacy rates and school life expectancy for girls in these developing nations. Now we have stage three. This is going to be where majority of the world is right now. It's going to be that yellow colored countries that we saw on the map a few slides ago. And this is where we're starting to have a modernized economy, and society is going to have increased family income. So the total fertility rate is going to significantly start declining due to the fact that we have more educational opportunities for women. We start to have a delayed age of marriage and first child, because since there's more educational opportunities to women, they're going to be more focused on their education and career and not getting married so young and having children early and for a long time. We're also going to have these women are going to have access to family planning and contraceptives. So we will be having a decrease in the total fertility rate. Now, overall, with these countries, we start to see a slowing growth rate as the birth rate drops closer to the death rate. And some of the economic and societal indicators of countries that are in this stage are going to have a pretty high per capita GDP, a long life expectancy, low infant mortality, and the total fertility rate is going to be near that replacement level, which remember we talked about it's about 2.1 because the offspring are going to be replacing the parents. And if we think about our pyramid diagrams, this is going to be the one where it starts to look a little bit like a house. It's kind of stable. And we are also going to see high literacy rates and school life expectancy for all in countries in this developed stage. Now, stage 4 is going to be our post-industrialized and highly developed. So these are going to be highly modernized countries that are very affluent. An example you could think of is like Japan. Now we're going to have the total fertility rates are going to decline even further as families become more wealthy and they spend more time on educational and career pursuits. We're going to have increased wealth and education, which is going to bring even more prevalent use of family planning and contraceptions. The crude birth rate is going to drop lower than the crude death rate, which means that the growth of the population is negative. So we're actually starting to see an overall population decline in countries that are in this post-industrialized stage. And some economic and societal indicators that we will see is a very high per capita GDP. These people are going to have the longest life expectancy. The total fertility rate is below that replacement level. So we're having less than 2.1 children per family on average. And again, as I said, this is going to lead to a decrease in the population. And in these countries, we tend to see the highest contraceptive use rates, which is contributing to this really low total fertility rate. So we are going to break this down and kind of look at the graphical representations and what is happening in these different stages. I know there's kind of a lot going on this graph, but I'm going to break it down. So we have these different stages, and then we have a few different lines here. The orange line is going to be the total population. This green line is going to be the birth rates, and the purplish bluish line is going to be the death rates. So we're going to kind of look at all three of these here. So we'll start with stage 1, which remember, we don't really have countries in this stage anymore. So it's the pre-industrial. We have high birth rates, high death rates, and we are going to see that it's actually a pretty stable population because although the birth rate and death rates are really high, they're pretty evenly matched. So overall, the population is going to be kind of stagnant here. Then we're going to move into stage 2, which is developing. Stage 2, you're going to have high birth rates, which we see up here with this green line, high birth rates, but our death rate is decreasing rapidly. And this is going to mean that overall, because we have high birth rates but lower death rates, our population is going to start going up. And if you think of our population pyramids that we saw earlier in this unit, we're going to start to see it's very like pyramid shaped. Then we go into stage 3, which is developed countries. The birth rate, we're going to see it's starting to fall here. And the death rate, it's falling, but it's going to be more slowly because we're kind of getting to like natural death rates. And the total population is increasing, but the rate is slowing down. So if you look here, this is pretty exponential growth, and this is starting to level off a little bit. So with these countries, we're going to start to see kind of a bit of more of that house shape for our population diagram. And then stage 4 is going to be the highly developed countries. So we're going to have a low birth rate. So this green line is getting pretty low here. We're going to have a low death rate, the blue line, which means that our population is actually not going to have much of a growth rate. And we might even see later that it starts to actually potentially decline. But normally, we're going to see it be pretty stable. It's leveling off because the birth rate and death rate are both going to be pretty the same right now. And so if you think about our global population calculation that we looked at, keep in mind that because we have the crude birth rate and death rate on the top of this equation, that changes in those are going to definitely impact the percentage of population growth rate that we see. And we have kind of all these different diagrams to show us the same thing. So this is going to be your FRQ practice for 3.9. Now I want you to look at this graph here, and I want you to identify the stage of this graph in which population grows the fastest and explain why this is the case. So keep in mind, we've got like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. The dotted line is the birth rate. The solid line is going to be the death rate. So in these stages, which population grows the fastest? And explain why this is the case. Then I also want you to describe one economic or societal indicator of a country in this phase. So that's going to be your FRQ practice for 3.9, and those were your 3.9 notes on demographic transition.